Right, I've been putting off this video for like 2 years now, and I've decided enough's enough. I'm just going to do it. I put a poll recently asking what video would you guys find most helpful, and it was like 50% of the vote was this video. You know, I've had people ask about it in the past. Everyone just wants to know, how do you turn riffs into songs? How do you actually do it? And the annoying part is it's so hard to answer, because I can tell you the process, and I have told you the process of doing this in the past, but actually showing you how it's done or explaining what it is you got to think about is a little bit harder. And so what I've decided to do is break this video down into, well, 2 videos. This video now is going to be more kind of a bit theoretical and a bit telling you what to think about and how to think about it when you're doing this. And then there's going to be another video where I'm kind of showing you what I'm doing and talking you through it a little bit more. So the methods I've got for you today are, well, they're far from glamorous, but they are the way that I go about writing songs. They are the way I go about structuring songs. And I think they are the only way to do it once you kind of get used to using them. So step 1, after you've come up with the riffs, is you need to organize them. What we're doing here is we're organizing the riffs by complexity. So, you know, the simplest riffs might be used in the least riff focused sections of the song, and the more complex riffs will be used in the more riff focused parts of the song. So what that means in practice is that, for example, if you have a vocalless intro, you can have a really complicated riff there and it's not going to be walking on something. And then if you have a verse that's got, you know, screamed vocals, you can have a slightly less complex riff. And then if you've got your chorus, which has got a melody you want people to catch onto, then you have your simplest riff there, or maybe even no riff and just have chords or something. So you got to organize your riffs something similar to that, and that will kind of help you to start to create a structure. But that's if you've got multiple riffs. If you've got one riff, you've got to think about the most impactful section of the song to have that, to start building the rest of the song off. I know that's a kind of weird sentence. Imagine you had a really simple riff that, you know, it's really hooky. You probably want to start with that riff. You might have it as an intro. You might have it as the riff in the chorus. And then once you've kind of worked that out, you can think about, do I want to have variations on this riff? So, for example, for the style of riffing that I often do, like the kind of early 2000s metalcore stuff, often a good variation is just adding a harmony on it. Or if you've got like a really complex modern metal kind of riff, often the variation is just turn the rhythm of that riff into chugs. So you have a riff that's a bunch of notes and it's got a certain rhythm to it, and then you just turn that rhythm into just like a drum beat chug kind of pattern. So that might be another variation on it. Or you might want it to be even more complex. So you turn a relatively simple riff into a more complex bit, maybe for when the vocals are down, or for when you've got a breakdown, or kind of after the chorus maybe. So you're kind of thinking about organizing variations on that riff for other parts of the song. So you'll notice that when you do this, the song kind of starts to fill itself up, and you've got smaller and smaller gaps between the sections that you need to start filling up. So the more variations you can add, the more you can think about, where am I placing these riffs, the less stuff you have to come up with after the fact. And before we move on, I just want to say, be careful with how many riffs you're adding. You know, you don't want to add so many variations on a riff, or so many individual riffs themselves, that you kind of take away from the song, and it gives it, the more riffs you add, the less people can be like, oh yeah, that's the riff from that song, because there's like a million riffs in that song, you know what I mean? So step 2, and this is where I said it wasn't very glamorous, but you just need to sit there and listen. And what this means is you record the riff down, and you play it and you pause it and you listen, and you play it and you pause it and you listen, you play it and you pause it and listen. You do that so many times. What you're doing is you're playing the riff so many times that you're trying to let your brain come out of the bit after, as if you are listening to the song. Does that make sense? So it's as if you're listening to a song on Spotify or whatever, and you're predicting what comes next. Now, this is a really boring and tedious process, but it is the best way to come up with stuff. Often you won't come up with anything though. And that's a really annoying bit, is that often you'll sit there and listen, and the silence after that will just be blank. Sometimes you just have to sit there and listen more. Sometimes you need to take a break. And sometimes it might just be that you haven't developed your listening ability enough. And what I mean by that is that when you listen to music, if you're listening to songs on Spotify or whatever, think about listening to the music and you're listening to what's going to come after that. For example, if you're at the end of the chorus, think about what's happened in the song prior, and think about, okay, what is this you know, I think there's maybe going to be a breakdown here, or maybe because of the style of the song, it's maybe going to be a bridge. Is the bridge going to go more energy, less energy? What energy level are we at now? That's the kind of things you want to be thinking about. And that will help you when you're writing your own music to kind of think, okay, I've got this riff. I can kind of hear a finished-ish product in my head. Where does that finished product go from where I'm at now? Something my dad always used to say was serve the song. And I think this is the best way to do that, because you're listening in your head to where the song wants to go itself. Now, if that wasn't tedious enough, I've got an even more tedious method for you: trial and error. Now, I know trial and error doesn't really sound like much of a method, but there is a bit of a knack to it. You have to be quick. You have to be really quick. Quick to not only create ideas, but also quick to delete them. Even though this is a really long, tedious, and boring process, you'll know that you've got the right idea when you can go back to the listening stage and it will kind of start to come naturally. So you come up with the riff, you trial and error the bit after the riff until you come up with something that's close enough. And then you go back to the listening idea and you listen to the riff and the bit after, and then you can start to hear something after that, because you're starting to put together what's getting closer to being a finished song, and your brain starts to pick up on that and kind of predict what comes next. So that's why I was saying it's really, really important that you build your listening ability, your analytical listening ability. So a bit of a weird, wishy-washy kind of video, which is why I didn't want to make this video in the first place, because I had no idea how to go about it. So you're going to have to let me know, does this help? Have I gone too kind of weird and abstract, or do I need to go more abstract? Let me know if this helps. Let me know what other ideas you want me to do. Yeah, I've got nothing else for you. See you later.